April 14th, 2025 on a Monday. Welcome to the Cody Corner live stream, guys. Happy Monday. How's the week treating y'all so far? It's the very beginning. Well, for some people, the very beginning of the week was Sunday, right? So, with that being said, guys, welcome to Cozy Corner TV. I am your host, Kieran Smith. Call me Q, and we are on the corner. We are on the corner. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the daily live stream. Where we live stream over here every single day except Sunday until further notice. When that changes, I will let you guys know. But until further notice, that is what we do over here. So as per usual, I'm going to go down the menu of what we're going to be digesting today. I usually tell you guys to make sure you are grounded and you are regulated before you take this in with me because news can be triggering, right? So yeah, if you're not, watch it later. If you are, welcome. So first up on the menu, face the nation. El Salvador's president says, I don't have the power to return mistakenly deported man to U.S. Okay, so that is in regards to Abrego Garcia. He was mistakenly deported, according to what mainstream media has been telling us, because this man was legal in some sort, but it turns out that he was not, that his paperwork actually was expired or no longer valid, and apparently also there's some talk about him being a part of MS-13. Even my wife doubts that part of it, but nonetheless she says that he was a part of some type of gang affiliation. He wasn't supposed to be here, and he's been here and he stayed. He started a family, so the news media is eating this up. You know, it's, oh my God, this father has been deported, and you know, his poor wife and his children have been estranged. So we're going to take a look at what the president of El Salvador, which is where Abrego Garcia currently is at, has to say about that. Then we're going to switch gears and go over the Fox News. Tyrus, everybody knows Tyrus. He famous for wrestling for the most part. Pretty big guy, great TV personality, has a beard. He did a great interview with Donald Trump. If you guys haven't seen it, try to find it. It was before President Trump became president for the second time. And it was a really great, transparent interview where Tyrus went on record to say, you know, he really looked at Donald Trump in a different type of way during that interview, like as a father and as a grandfather, you know, as a loving grandfather. And yeah, he saw a different side of him. So Tyrus is fed up after Tim Walz. We are still not rid of Mr. Walz. He has been doing many of town hall meets from what I hear. Latest Elon Musk diatribe. So Tim Walz has been talking about Elon Musk once again in the public sector, saying how weird he is and how he doesn't pay his taxes and how, you know, we should demonize Elon Musk. I have no reason why Tim Walz would say this, why he is still talking these type of buffoonery things, but he is. So we'll take a look at that. And then we'll switch over. Still Fox News. It says Bill Maher, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that don't know Bill Maher, he has a TV show. Is it Showtime with Bill? What's the name of Bill Maher's late night show? Let me say it right here. Let me put some respect on his name. Right? Real time with Bill Maher. And you think I would know that because I react to a good amount of his stuff, but I'm usually not on real time. I usually go grab his stuff off of YouTube and do it. But nonetheless, Fox News reacted to Bill Maher shocked by Donald Trump meeting as dinner guests share new details. So it's no secret any longer that Bill Maher has went to the White House and met with President Trump. This was something that a lot of people were looking forward to, as Bill said, and President Trump, and then not everybody liked it, you know, but we understand why. Bill Maher went on record to say that him and President Trump have decided that the people who didn't want them to talk, that they don't like them. So I thought this was extremely interesting that Bill Maher, one of the leading liberal voices, one of the leading Democrats, probably in America, has went on record to say that Donald Trump actually wasn't as bad as he thought he was going to be. And I extremely admired and was grateful for Bill Maher's transparency here, because he would have been, we know Bill's personality. If you know, you know. He has no problem with saying if someone is not a very agreeable person. Let's just say he would use more colorful words. But nonetheless, he said Donald Trump wasn't as bad as he thought he was. So we'll react to that. Let me shout the chat out for a second. I don't know. Be aware. What's up? How you doing? Thanks for stopping by. Lakers in 5, bud. Trump Nation, oh man, I love it. How are the Lakers doing right now? Ever since they got Luca, it's like a whole cheat code, bro. Like I don't even know how to feel. G, you talking to nobody, bro? No, that's not true. I am talking to people. G, I'm talking to you. What up, G? Yo, you guys in the chat, make sure that you hit that like button for me. It is free. It only takes 1 second. So we're gonna take a look at Bill Maher meeting guest at the White House. He was there with, I believe, Kid Rock, and Dana White was there as well. Then we're going to switch over to CBC News, The National. They're young, male, and swinging conservative. So that's what CBC News, The National covered. I thought this was brilliant, and I was like, there's no way I can't react to this. Like, there were other things I wanted to put up here today, but when I saw this, I was like, this has to be shown. It can't go unnoticed. CBC Radio Canada is a Canadian public broadcast service. Shout out to them. They're young, male, and swinging conservative, hence the title of my thumbnail. So there are a great deal of young men. I believe 40 and under is the number that I'm seeing in a lot of my research, but here on CBC News, they really cover 30 and under, how these young men are swinging completely conservative. No more liberal party, no more, men and women sports, biological men at least, no more, weird policy and legislation being passed. These men are starting to swing conservative and say, you know what? There's actually a level of normalcy that we would actually like to see in America again. And it's showing in the polls. So we're going to take a look at that. Then we're going to switch over to EWTN, Canada's election and Catholic concerns. So this was extremely interesting to me because finally somebody from the church is calling out Mark Carney and his absurd stances on some of the things that he stands for. So I am extremely interested to show this to you guys. As I always say on here, Canada is my second most watched country on the channel to the United States, so I usually cover a lot of Canadian news on here. Never tell my Canadian friends and family how to vote because I'm not there, but always put it out there as real as I can, getting it from some of the realest and what I think are best sources from Canadian news. So, and not mainstream, where I'm gonna get a bunch of lies, right? So most of the time the people I cover, they are pretty honest about what they're covering and they're pretty transparent about it. If they are not, I will go grab a clip from someone who is more transparent than them and a better source, and I will usually react to that. On here, however, it is about 7, 8, 9, 10, a 4-minute clip where we're gonna see one of the bishops react to the fact that Mark Carney believes and stands very heavily on abortion. And I believe that he also supports this whole euthanasia thing they have going in Canada, the MAID, medical assisted and dying. So they're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to jump over to then Jordan Peterson again. I've been playing about 10 minutes of this every single day on the channel because I just want Canadians to see what Jordan Peterson is talking about on here in regards to Mark Carney. I think he did a brilliant thing, and he went ahead and did something of what Joe Rogan would have done, and put some information out on a very large platform for voters to go to the polls smart, not go unintelligently. And I appreciated him for this. I thought it was brilliant. We have it happen over here all of the time. All types of people over here do it. One of the people who we saw do it pre-election was Joe Rogan, and he had on now President Donald Trump and now Vice President J.D. Vance. So I think it was great for the election. I think it did wonders for them. I think Kamala Harris did a disservice to her own campaign by not going on there, but she didn't show up. So we're going to take a look at the next 10 minutes of this. We are 27 minutes into it. So if you guys want to see this whole video by Jordan Peterson, you just go to his channel, Jordan B. Peterson, and it's called Reaction to Imminent Liberal Victory in Canada, which I hope is not the truth. And then we're going to jump over to Cliff Buell. Cliff Buell is a YouTube content creator who focuses on Christian content. And usually I end a live stream with him every single day or night. Usually one clip from him, if not another YouTube content creator that focuses on Christian content or is a Christian. So, with that being said, guys, let's jump right in. First up, Face the Nation. El Salvador's president says, I don't have the power to return mistakenly deported man to U.S. Alberto Garcia, let's take a listen.
President Trump is hosting El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele at the White House today. The two leaders have become allies as the U.S. ramps up its deportation efforts to the Central American country. President Bukele's visit comes as the Trump administration pushes back on a Supreme Court order to facilitate the return of a Maryland man wrongly deported to a prison in El Salvador. Today, President Bukele told reporters he has no intention of aiding in that process.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, if I smuggle him into the United States, or whether, of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So I'm going to run that back so you guys can hear it freestanding again. But that was the president of El Salvador. And he says, how am I going to return him to the United States? What do I do? Smuggle him? And then he goes on to say, how am I supposed to return him to the United States? I can't return a terrorist to the United States. Okay, so that's the president of El Salvador saying that. So now, it can't be any kind of, even though there still will be crazy rhetoric out there, like, oh, the White House doesn't want to go get him, and oh, they're ignoring the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, and oh, President Trump thinks he can do whatever he wants to do. The president of El Salvador just said, how am I supposed to get him back into the United States? Am I supposed to smuggle him back in? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Smuggle a terrorist back into the United States? And I watched it. I'm not finished. I think the whole thing is about 45 minutes or so. But I'm watching through it, so I'll probably be done with it by tomorrow, later tonight. And he goes on record to say, I don't have the power to bring him back to the United States. Yeah, you know why? Because if they've already deemed him an MS-13 gang member, we don't know for sure if he is or he isn't, but if they've already deemed him that, said he's been involved in gang activity, and he wasn't supposed to be in the United States to begin with because he entered illegally, there's no way he would have the power to bring him back, because based on the law of the land, he would be deemed as a terrorist, and the United States wouldn't bring in and aid and abet a terrorist. So it's a big deal that he's the one saying it. I'm wondering how much people are actually going to pay attention to whose mouth is actually coming out of, though.
The U.S. ramps up its deportation efforts to the Central American country. President Bukele's visit comes as the Trump administration pushes back on a Supreme Court order to facilitate the return of a Maryland man wrongly deported to a prison in El Salvador. Today, President Bukele told reporters he has no intention of aiding in that process.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, if I smuggle him into the United States, or whether, of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
A lot to unpack there, so let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi. Olivia, the Trump administration says it has no legal obligation to return Kilmer Abrego Garcia. The Maryland father was deported amidst this administrative error, despite the Supreme Court ruling that steps must be taken to bring him back. So what else did we hear from members of the administration and from President Bukele today?
Well, clearly it was the main topic of conversation. This meeting between the two leaders could not have come at a more important time after the Supreme Court said that this administration must do everything they can to bring him back and begin facilitating that process. But the White House is saying it's not within their ability. They say the president's authority only allows him to dictate foreign policy, not dictate whether or not another country can bring someone back to the United States. So we heard there during that Oval Office meeting a very contentious back and forth between not only the president and people within his administration, but also the press asking, well, what's the next step? Now that the Supreme Court said this, what are you going to be doing? We heard from Stephen Miller, who is an advisor close to the president, saying that it's out of their hands, not within their jurisdiction. It is within the jurisdiction, though, of the Salvadorian president, Bukele, who was sitting right there. And he was asked, are you going to bring him home? What are you going to do? You heard his response there. He said, how can I return him to the United States? Should I smuggle him? He said, of course I'm not going to do it. He said, the question is so preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? So seemingly not going to cooperate with bringing this Maryland man back to the United States, begging a lot of questions of what exactly happens next, especially when the Supreme Court said this administration must facilitate steps to bring him home. A lot of questions there, Lindsay.
Well, Olivia, tariffs are still on the minds of many. The president now insists he granted no exceptions for electronics made in China. Think cell phones, even though that announcement was made Friday. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping do not have plans to speak in the near future. But U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick expressed confidence Sunday in the president's ability to negotiate with Xi. Let's listen.
He knows how to play this game. He knows how to deal with President Xi. This is the right person for the right role, and I am confident this is going to work out with China. Yes, is it in a tough spot now? Of course it is, but that'll, you'll see. All of that energy will sort of decline, and we'll end up in a perfectly reasonable place with China.
First, though, caught in the crosshairs, we have a lot of businesses who are wondering what they're going to be doing, if they only have a certain product left in their warehouses, et cetera. Is there any sign at this point right now that either side is going to capitulate in the standoff?
No sign of that yet, Lindsay. It does look like this is going to continue being confusing. Of course, we heard Friday that the tariffs would go up to 145% on China. Before, they said they would be excluding those electronics, and those electronics make up about a quarter of the trade that we get from China. So a lot of those businesses asking the same question, what is going to be going on? We also heard from Trump today where he said that there will be more tariffs coming specifically on semiconductors. Now, we get the majority of those, not from China, but from Taiwan, and that's under national security reasons that we do that. And certainly we are trying to increase semiconductor production here in the United States. So this is part of that play, but there's still a lot of questions about what exactly is going to be exempted, what the tariff war with China looks like. And it all comes as Chinese leader Xi Jinping is in Vietnam today, meeting with their leader, and he's going to be going to Cambodia to meet with the leader there in that country. Certainly as Trump is looking to target those countries as well with those reciprocal tariffs that we've now seen saved off for another 90 days as they're looking to make a deal with those countries. But a lot of questions about specifically what this trade war will look like as Trump is continuing to ramp up tariffs against China.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi, thank you.
All right, guys, so we're going to switch over to Fox News. Tiger is fed up after Tim Walz's latest Elon Musk diatribe. Okay. So I said this earlier. Tim Walz has been doing a couple of, I think they're town halls, because that's what a couple of representatives have been doing in, Congress, men, women, and senators. And this one particular one they caught, he's talking about Elon Musk again. He's saying that, we shouldn't be demonizing people, we shouldn't be terrorizing people, but if we are going to do it, and I'm slightly paraphrasing this, that we should do it to people who are like Elon Musk. And this is where I said, Tim Walz, he's still far off and to the left, saying those things that he said during the campaign with Kamala Harris. So let's take a listen at the five react to him, and Tyrus is with him as well.
Walz says demonize Musk more.
It's okay in America to be successful. We should celebrate that. And people are successful. What my beef is, once you get successful, don't be a greedy bastard and not pay your taxes. Don't be who see this, and I would argue this, we're creating a false narrative for them that everybody is super rich and has Lamborghinis and life is easy. But that's what we're going to have to figure out in our society about social media and all those things. But I don't think we should be the party that demonizes someone because they're able to afford something or they're able to work hard and got something. What we should demonize is people like Elon Musk and those people that do that. That's different. That's different.
Different. What up, brain? Now, seriously, Jim, he has this brand new idea.
Okay, this is not the five. He just has a couple news anchors with him, because the five, we would see Jesse Waters there. So let me rephrase that.
Yeah, I've never heard of this before. Demonize the rich. Where did he come up with that?
Yet again, another Democrat. Millionaires, billionaires got to pay their fair share of taxes. Biden used to always say that.
Yeah.
As his rich son was under indictment for tax evasion.
Yes.
But keep putting that out there. And Elon paid like $11 billion in taxes last year.
Yes.
So he did pay his taxes.
Yes, and not only that, Emily, he had a bonus. It was like $50-some-odd billion, I think. It was, and a Democrat stopped his bonus from being paid in Delaware. Remember this?
That's a fact.
And if they let him get paid, half of it would have gone to the government. It would have been the largest individual tax payment in history. This guy is like, he is supposedly a public servant, Musk is the public servant. This guy is the public leech.
Yes. And he's like herpes, where he's always there. You can never get rid of him.
Tell me about
I'm
it.
sorry, Father. Look, at the end of the day, my problem with this argument too is that when they demonize only certain billionaires and millionaires, the reality of the contribution to society versus the absolute destruction. When you compare, for example, George Soros with Elon Musk, who's rescuing astronauts? Who has truly led to life-changing, medically breakthrough technology?
Getting the paralyzed to walk.
Exactly. Everything that Musk has done has been for the betterment of society and totally selfless. Does he want to make money? Sure. But first, he was simply a genius that wanted to help contribute to this world. George Soros and his funds have absolutely destroyed lives, truly led to deaths, multiple deaths, and they're picking and choosing.
Minneapolis, Tyrus, is in Minnesota.
Yes.
If you want something demonized, he turned Minnesota into hell.
I listen, I feel bad for Elon.
Mm-hmm.
I would be furious if I was him. Mm-hmm. This is who you sent to troll me?
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing wrong to get the guy from D Team to come out at Family Theater and call me names?
Yeah.
Like, Tim, I would, if they're like, oh, Tyrus, man, tough news cycle. Tim Walz is talking about you. I'd be like, oh, Timmy? I want to fight him so bad. Why won't he just answer my tweets, my DMs, like just one arm? And I just want to slap this. He's so weak. He brings nothing. If you were going to go after someone, man to man, hit him with a fact. Hit him with something real.
Yes.
You don't have anything. And here's the cold part. If Elon called him up and said, hey, Tim, you want a job? He would take it. Because that's what spineless. He would, and when he was questioned, he was like, I was just holding him an account. You know, I respect him, and I'm so happy to be working for X. He is the worst player on their team, and they don't mind sending him out because
They're trying to get him off the table.
Yeah.
They're putting him out early so he can't be a factor later.
So he can mess up. Yep, I agree.
If he says Elon didn't pay taxes, and of course he did, Musk has all the money in the world. Should he sue this bastard?
No, I think Musk did the right thing. He didn't even attack back, against Walz. Really, what he did was he tweeted from the White House. He was like, "I'm looking at the White House portraits, and I'm so glad that J.D. Vance is vice president." Which is so true. You know, when you think about it, you're like, oh, we dodged a bullet. We don't have Kamala, we got President Trump. But also, I mean, I'm so glad we have JD instead of this guy. And everyone tried to pitch.
Yeah, that's definitely a shot. I'm so glad JD Vance is vice president because if Kamala Harris would have won, Tim Walz would have been vice president. So that was a shot from Elon right there.
Him as this pillar of masculinity.
Right.
That's was the, and it never really it can't hold. They tried to make him like he was a coach. He doesn't give off coach vibes. Look at his picture.
Well, creepy coach.
Yeah, well, that's what I say. Take a look at him. He's not like a coach. He's more like that Rachel Levine. Doesn't he kind of look like a
He
slave?
dresses like Rachel Levine. Look, he has a sports coat and a zip-up sweater underneath. No man wears that.
I may have done that in the past.
Yes.
I won't now, Tyrus.
No, and one day somebody's going to explain what a corporate income tax is to these people. It's not paid by this. It's not paid by the corporation. It's not like a building that goes, I'm going to pay taxes. It's the workers, it's the shareholders, and it's the customers. And get this, they already paid their taxes.
Yeah.
So you're actually just creating a tax. It's like any. You could tax this table and say, okay, we're taxed. That's what it is. It's just a tax on an object. Makes no sense. Up next, discharged troops get an apology. What?
Yeah, so we have Tim Walz. I totally agree with Gutfield right there when he says that they're putting him out there early, so later he's not, he's not a problem. I agree with him there. Like, Tim Walz is going to be a problem, and I'm extremely worried that he's thinking about running in some sort of way. I hope he doesn't do that, but I do think that he is thinking about that for some odd reason. All right, guys. So when it comes to the El Salvador's president saying that he can't return Abrego Garcia. I know we're still going to hear rhetoric about this. That was the first clip that we watched. I wanted to say something in regards to that because it's going to be put out there that President Trump's administration is trying to defy the Supreme Court. And I think that that's part of the reason why President Trump had El Salvador's president meet with him in the White House. So America and El Salvador and the Supreme Court could hear this man out of his own mouth say, as the president of El Salvador, I don't have the power to bring him back. And that's exactly what he said. So if he's going to put that out there, that he doesn't have the power to bring him back, and then he's going to also put it out there, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to smuggle him back into America? Am I supposed to smuggle a terrorist back into America? Just the verbiage he's choosing to use on live TV shows that he's not in very much support of Abrego Garcia returning to the United States. So right now, I'm not sure what that looks like. We do know that the Supreme Court has ordered it, but not so sure if we're actually going to see the Maryland man return. So, in regards to Tim Walz, yeah, it's funny because all Elon's response looked like was him. I think he did a tweet. He said, and at the White House, he said, "I'm looking at photos on the wall, and it's so nice that J.D. Vance is vice president." And like I said, that's a shot to Tim Walz because if Kamala Harris would have won, Tim Walz would have been president. I mean, they're talking about masculinity a lot. There's no secret there. When Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were running, they had such a low percentage of the male vote that it was ridiculous. In fact, way before election night even came, this was something that was wildly talked about. Remember, one of the nicknames for him was Tampon Tim, right? And that's because in his state, he allowed tampons to be in boys' bathrooms. So that's why he even got the nickname on the campaign trail. There were a lot of men who didn't agree with Tim Walz. There were a lot of guys who didn't like him. A lot of guys didn't feel like he was very masculine. And that came from him being a coach, right? So it's not just about the fact that, like, oh, they're calling him names and they don't like Tim Walz. No, like, as a matter of fact, on the campaign trail, he tried his hardest to talk about how Trump and J.D. Vance was weird. And it just started to work against him. Like, people started to tell him how weird he was and for him to stop saying things like that. So I agree with Gutfield when he says that they're putting him out there now, you know, so people can hear his ridiculousness. So he's not even considered for a presidential candidate in 2028. Because right now, with all the talking he's doing, we can remember, like, oh, yeah, that's the Tim Walz from the campaign trail. We don't know if we want to make that guy president or vice president, right? So, staying with Fox News, Bill Maher, shocked by Trump meeting as dinner guests share new details. So, I believe at the White House when this dinner occurred, it was Donald Trump, Bill Maher, Dana White, and I think Kid Rock was there because I think Bill Maher went through Kid Rock to orchestrate the whole thing. So they were at the White House, and it turns out, I covered this yesterday on the live stream, that Bill Maher said that President Trump wasn't as bad as he thought he was going to be. Now, that wasn't his first time meeting him. Throughout the years, he said that he's known him, ran into him, has spoken to him. But he said, you know, every single thing that I thought I was going to get for this guy, I got none of it. You know, he didn't over-talk him. He wasn't rude. Anytime Bill tried to fact check him, he just kind of took it and, you know, he wasn't like aggressive about it. He wasn't offended by it. So Bill Maher gave President Trump praise, let's say. Let's use that word, right? So let's take a look at how Fox News covered it and what they had to say about Bill Maher's meeting with Trump.
We were telling you a week ago about how the president sat down with, at Kid Rock's suggestion, he invited Bill Maher into the White House for dinner. And they sat down. Dana White was actually at that dinner along with one other person and Kid Rock. And on his show over the weekend on Max, Bill Maher actually told his audience, which for the most part, you get the feeling they don't like Trump, that Bill Maher had a really good time. Listen to that.
When I got there, that guy wasn't living there. Now, does Trump want respect? Of course, who doesn't? My friend said to me, what are you gonna wear to the White House? I said, I don't know, but I'm not gonna dress like Zelensky, I'll tell you that. He's much more self-aware than he lets on in public. Look, I get it. It doesn't matter who he is at a private dinner with a comedian. It matters who he is on the world stage. I'm just taking it as a positive that this person exists, because everything I've ever not liked about him was, I swear to God, absent, at least on this night with this guy. I never felt I had to walk on eggshells around him. And honestly, I voted for Clinton and Obama, and I would never feel comfortable talking to them the way I was able to talk with Donald Trump. That's just how it went down, make of it what you will. Me, I feel it's emblematic of why the Democrats are so unpopular these days.
Well, and when he started out his monologue, he pulled out a piece of paper and he said, I wrote down all of the words, or typed out all of the words that Donald Trump has said negatively about me, all the names he's called me. And
Yeah, this right here, Bill Maher said that he typed something out. He typed out a list of all of the things that Donald Trump has called him throughout the years. Like all of the bad things. He said it on his show, like some of the names, and he said he took it with him to the White House and he asked President Trump to sign it, and he signed it for him.
And he said I handed it to him and he signed it, so he's going to keep it forever and frame it. But I thought that was a great way to kind of break the ice. And he said that Donald Trump, he saw him laugh. He allowed him to tell jokes about him, and Donald Trump was laughing. He said, I don't see him do that in public. But it was, they got along.
Well, he described the Trump it factor. And of course, we all had the opportunity to interview the president, talk to him before and after the interview. So we know what the Trump touch is. But I also think in many ways, the way that Trump does politics have completely shifted the way that we expect as voters for our politicians to communicate with us. And I think whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you gotta be tangible now. People want to hear from you, they want to see you, they want to see the relatable factor.
Yeah.
You can't be distant from the people. And I think that's why people like Trump. That's why people, I know the media used to report that the rallies were blah, 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 but people felt that personal touch with the president when they would go to his rallies. That's why they kept coming.
Right. And Bill Maher also said, a lot of his friends were like, why would you ever go to the White House to talk to him about anything? And Bill Maher made the point that we ought to be, as a country, able to sit down with people we disagree with politically and have a meal and talk about stuff. And they did it.
Yes, and not burn up Tesla and blow up Cybertrucks and Tesla cars because you don't like Elon Musk and he doesn't agree with your political stance, because it's just ridiculous.
And his book report was he had a good time. And the president was receptive and listened and laughed, and a good time was had by all.
Yeah, it is Holy Week. We should be able to break bread with both sides, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to take a look at that because it was important to me because like he said, a lot of people didn't want, them to sit down. Some people were asking, like, why are you going to the White House to sit down with President Trump? And Bill Maher said, like, if we can't sit down and we can't just have a conversation because we don't agree politically, it's a problem. And I totally agree with him. I'm glad that he went and he sat down. And I said it on a live stream yesterday. I was very appreciative of his transparency. Because a lot of people could have went and saw Trump like that and been like, oh, yeah, whatever, I still don't like him. And it could have been a sour book report. But Bill was very positive about it. He was transparent. He said, he took shots at him. He corrected him. He fact-checked him, and President Trump took it. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't pushy, he wasn't angry. So I just love the fact that Bill was just very transparent.
I want to have my...
And what his meeting with President Trump was like. So, switching over to CBC News, the National, right? CBC News is a Canadian public broadcast service. Shout out to them. I thought they did a brilliant thing covering this. It says they're young, male, and swinging conservative. So, hence the title of my thumbnail. We have a lot of males that are swinging conservative, and this is not surprising to me at all. I said it over here when I was talking to my Canadian family and friends that in the United States, I think that over the last decade, we have had enough of the far left extreme liberalism, and that's why we saw the country go so right. And I only say so right because there were so many politicians on the left that were shocked that Donald Trump won. They didn't think it was a possibility that he could even win. And the fact that he did, it kind of left whiplash amongst the Democratic Party, and then we saw that very quickly turn into turmoil and disarray, and we've seen it continue, right? So I thought the gentleman did a brilliant job covering this. because he talks about, now he's really covering men that's 30 and under. I would say really 40 and under, because I've been doing really we can go to 45 and under, because I've just done a wider broad of research on this. And I went to some of not just millennials being the older generation, but a little bit of Gen X as well. So that's why I have a higher number. He focused on 30 and under. But it's still very interesting to see the sway in numbers. There's a lot of numbers on here, which I appreciate. So whatever you guys can't read, I'll read it out loud just so you can see it.
I have my traditional values. I want to be able to be a man. I want to be able to be masculine.
The voices of a new generation of conservatives.
They continue to vote liberal. They continue to elect a socialist government that takes our money, makes our decisions for us, and ruins our country.
They're young, male, and frustrated.
Runaway taxation.
We're at a moment where men and women are moving in opposite directions.
A trend happening in some of the world's biggest democracies.
CBS News exit polling finds that the president-elect won white men under 30 by 7 percentage points.
Who covered this madness? CBS, of course. So this says national vote for president. White men under 30. 45% for Harris, 52% for Trump. Impact of young voters on presidential election.
In Germany,
The far-right AfD is the winner among young men, while a large number of young women chose the left party.
and in South Korea,
The frustration and anger of young men in this country.
So in Germany, 27% of men chose a more conservative party, and 35% of women chose the left party.
Whether their opinion is right or wrong is palpable.
in Canada, young men are now an integral part of Pierre Poilievre's base.
The extent to which the coalition has changed, I think would be very shocking to people. It's very, very young.
Carney's not here for you. He's here to put Canada last.
Canadian politics has changed a lot in the last 4 years. Like, check this out.
In the 2021 federal election, polls suggested that about...
So this says, if an election were held today, which national political party would you vote for? It says conservative support among 18 to 30-year-olds. 27% of men. Which national party would you vote for? So what are they going to say here?
The same number of young men and young women voted for the Conservatives. But today...
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's the same number. It was 27% conservative on the men's side, 29% conservative on the women's side.
Things are way different. That's it.
Now it's 41% on the men's side and 23% on the women's side.
18-point gap. And pollster David Coletto says that gap is growing.
Have you ever seen support this high for the Conservatives among young men?
Not in my career. It is a new phenomenon that we are seeing such a divide that the demographic most likely today to say they're going to vote conservative in our polling are men under the age of 30. That is a complete change to at least what I'm going to say the last few decades of Canadian politics.
In the last 3 federal elections, voters under 30 were more likely to vote for either the Liberals or the NDP than for the Conservatives, which kind of fits with the stereotype of young people being more progressive. But around the time Pierre Poilievre became the Conservative leader, Gen Z men shifted their support to the party. Jeannie Roth was Poilievre's director of communications on his leadership campaign.
What's changed is as young people are increasingly unhappy with where they sit in the world because they don't own homes, because they haven't been able to start families, because they feel like when they take public transit it's unsafe. Increasingly, those young voters are open to voting conservative.
Boomers don't actually give a flying fudge about the future generations of Canada.
Adam Beattie is a conservative influencer from the Vancouver area. He posts under the name Robin Skies on TikTok, where he has nearly 180,000 followers. Beattie voted for the NDP in his first federal election in 2015, but he eventually turned to the Conservatives because he felt they were more responsive to the anxieties of young men.
Why do you think conservatism now is appealing to young men in a way that maybe it hadn't before?
Because we're on the front line of all the crap that's going on.
Beattie says he moved out of downtown Vancouver because it was too expensive and because he was assaulted.
But having like a crazed person who's clearly high on something attack me, call the police and have the police look at me and say, there's nothing we can do about it. Yeah, it's a radicalizing experience. And the only people who are capable of living life without having to face that, frankly, are an older generation who live in protected neighborhoods, who bought into those neighborhoods when those neighborhoods were inexpensive, and who continue to be shielded from the reality that's going on that's being caused by these liberal policies and ideas.
We wanted to get a better understanding of when this gender gap began to emerge. So CBC News analyzed data from the Canadian Election Study, a comprehensive survey run by political scientists before and after elections. The data suggests young men and women once had similar attitudes on questions about whether more should be done for women. But by 2015, their views began to diverge. The same goes for what should be done for racialized minorities. And recent polling by Abacus Data suggests that young men are more likely than young women to agree trans athletes should not be able to play on sports teams.
And that's something that I think, I really think the Democratic Party should pay attention to this. It's funny because I remember pre-election, there were some conservatives that when they would be at campaign rallies for President Trump and they would make their individual speeches, you had a lot of them saying that the Democratic Party hates men. Like they hate men just because of the way they were treating them, some of the policies they were pushing. It's funny, like transgender athletes should not be able to play on sports teams that match their current gender identity, meaning if a man is trying to transition into a woman. And what's funny? That men are most likely to say no to this. That's interesting because it's like, so we have about 50% of women saying no, like let the trans women play on the same team with us, and then you have the people that were born the same gender as them saying, I don't think that that's a good idea, that probably shouldn't be happening. This is when we should wake up and really take a look at this. Naturally women, not that men can't be, I'm not saying that, but naturally women are going to be more empathetic towards certain things, right? But nonetheless, if the person is born a male and you have other men saying, I don't think this is a good idea, even if this person is on estrogen, then you should probably at least take heed to that warning if it's coming from the same gender that the person was born as.
Should not be able to play on sports teams and are more likely to believe there are no longer significant obstacles to women getting ahead. Coletto says young Canadians do agree on political and economic topics, like the importance of healthcare and childcare. It's on these cultural questions where young men lean conservative.
I think they do feel very anxious about the scale and the speed at which change is happening, particularly in societal kind of power structures, right? Like, it may be awkward to say, but I think they feel that their place in society is weakening and is maybe not as relevant as it used to be. Right? That the historic advantage that particularly white men have had in our society is been challenged.
Alice Evans is studying how that rapid change has led to a global gender gap.
I think there is a risk that progressive activism has made some men feel alienated.
Evans says young people began polarizing along gender lines when they started spending less and less time socializing in person and more time on social media.
Globally, coupling is down, socializing is down, fertility is down. And that's a totally new dynamic whereby men and women are not necessarily understanding each other's perspectives. So people are spending much more time alone, by themselves, single, and then in these online networks.
Jobs are being taken. The backlash to progressive politics has been stoked by online influencers known as the manosphere.
How long before we have an actual sex robot that can talk to you like that?
Probably not long. It's a corner of the internet where figures like Joe Rogan host hours-long podcasts that are popular with young men.
All this ridiculous woke shit with these rigid ideas of what you have to say and not say. None of that is liberal. None of that is really open-minded or progressive. It's all just it's a cult.
Men may gravitate to guys like Trump or Elon Musk who are saying, hey, the cavalry is here. We're going to cheer for the boys. We're going to champion men's rights. We're going to put men center stage for a change. Because that's an affirming message. So if men feel that they've always been left out and derided and neglected by these exclusionary progressive campaigns, then they may want their own heroes.
Sure, it's my tirade on the screen.
Polyev often speaks in a language that resonates with young men.
This insane, woke, DEI obsession is driving people away.
Or like when he sits with Jordan Peterson.
Young people say, look, okay, I went through, I got an education, I worked nonstop, and I have made the calculation that there is no mathematical path for me to own a house.
It's a strategy, I think, designed entirely to speak to that cohort, which is not a normal conservative audience. And so if Pierre Poilievre finds a way to get those young men out to vote, that's a constituency that could be decisive in him becoming prime minister.
Young men like Beattie.
The only reason why young people on the right are talking about all of this woke stuff is because people on the left are obsessed with it. They're constant, and it's like, I don't care. I want a job, I want a house, I want a family, I want safety.
Since Trump's return to the White House, public opinion in Canada has been in a state of extreme flux. So far, young men have stood by the Conservatives, but boomers have shifted their support back to the Liberals.
It's certainly true for any political leader trying to hold together a broad voting coalition that there are always going to be concerns about appealing to one component of that voting coalition over another. You know, Poilievre is talking about institutions being broken, and so if you feel defensive of institutions, which many older voters do, it's harder for that to resonate.
Don't get me wrong, Donald Trump's comments about 51st state and the tariffs, not good, okay? Can jail. But the idea that people
I want to hear this again, something she said about they said about the older liberals, because this is actually something that's very true. When I first started to hear this in the news, which was some time ago, I think when I first heard it, it was probably actually about 2 years ago, despite everything going on with the Biden administration. But I said it made sense because even after the presidential debate and people saw how horribly Joe Biden did, there were still people that were like, I'm still going to vote for Joe Biden because they just could not vote for Donald Trump. At least they wouldn't let themselves, right? But it makes sense. When I first started to hear this, I thought to myself, why would the boomer generation be gravitating back towards the liberals? Like, that doesn't make sense to me, but it actually does, because if we think about the boomer generation, they were around for some of the greatest Democrats, right? So it makes sense that they would have that love and that romance for the Democratic Party. It just doesn't seem, I mean, we got the Kennedys there, we have during the civil rights movement, there's a lot of things that the Democratic Party was doing at one point where the boomers, it was a very prominent time in their life. So when I thought about everything that I know about, the boomer generation, and then you just kind of put some things together off of research, it makes sense that they would be doing that. It's just that it's not the same Democratic Party it was when Kennedy was around. And that's just something that I hope that they can realize. I do know a lot of older boomers this time around that actually did vote for Donald Trump, and they weren't necessarily huge fans of Donald Trump, but they did want to see the economy get better. If we're paying attention to just economically, just how the generations are lining up, the boomers are next in line to retire. So after that, then Gen X will become the oldest generation in the workforce, right? But right now, the millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. So I just think it was interesting when I first saw that. And I'm like, man, the baby boomers are gravitating back towards the liberals. But it makes perfect sense. They were around for some of, their generation is full of some of the greatest, Democratic presidents, if we would call them that. So it makes sense why they would have that love for the party. But this ain't that, guys. This ain't Kennedy.
And the Conservatives. But boomers have shifted their support back to the Liberals.
It's certainly true for any political leader trying to hold together a broad voting coalition that there are always going to be concerns about appealing to one component of that voting coalition over another. Poilievre is talking about institutions being broken, and so if you feel defensive of institutions, which many older voters do, it's harder for that to resonate.
Don't get me wrong, Donald Trump's comments about 51st state. And
yeah, that makes sense. He says Poilievre is talking about institutions being broken, and she said if you're an older person and you're defensive of institutions, then it would be harder for that to resonate. And I would say that's 100%. She hit that spot on, because there are some boomers who are extremely defensive of certain institutions, right? And I mean, like, you can't touch those, and You shouldn't touch those, and there would never be fraud in that. And then when you have somebody like a Donald Trump or a Pierre Poilievre who comes in and says, no, like, I actually think there could be a lot of corruption in this. It's gonna be harder, I could see, for like an older liberal to go with that. Like, oh, here comes this conservative guy talking about that our great institution of such and such is corrupt. So I can see that being much harder to resonate with like baby boomers and even older generations.
Don't get me wrong, Donald Trump's comments about 51st state and the tariffs, not good, okay? Can jail. But the idea that people specifically of an older generation might be willing to give a mandate to Mark Carney because essentially Donald Trump bruised their ego while their kids are struggling to pay rent and to buy a house and to afford the basics is frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah. I feel the exact same way.
If you
That's
want-
exactly what I said. I said, man, if they are gravitating towards if they're gravitating towards Carney, like you said, because Donald Trump has bruised their ego in some way, and they're doing that despite their kids being able to one day buy a house, be able to afford the basics. It's frustrating. I would say, yeah, it is. It is. So if I'm honest, some of the numbers that I saw during our election, I wondered where some of them came from when it came to, let's just say, certain parties that I was seeing. I was wondering where it came from. I did like the fact that RFK got a good amount of votes. He actually did get more than Kamala Harris. But, Bill O'Reilly hit it on the nail when he said that the independent party usually just doesn't raise enough funds to kind of kick the campaign off the right way, the way it needs to be. So that's why usually we end up voting for Democrat or Republican. But yeah, even the numbers for the independent, they weren't bad. So I wondered where those numbers came from. Did they come from frustrated, voters or older voters who lost confidence in both parties, it's not like Kamala Harris didn't win any states, so the fact that she did win some states and the economy was the way it was, where did those numbers come from? Did they just come from people who are extremely fearful of a conservative party? So I think it's important to stay curious about things like that instead of just jumping, to a conclusion, and just, if you stay curious, it's hard to be offended, and I live by that. You ask questions, you're curious about something. It takes a lot more to be offended by it. So with that being said, guys, we're going to switch gears and we're going to jump over to EWTN. Shout out to them. Canada's election and Catholic concerns. So as I said, we watched CBC News, and that's a Canadian public broadcasting network. I tell you guys all of the time that Canada is my second most watched country on my channel to the United States, so I cover a good amount of Canadian news. Because their election is coming up, I have been watching it a lot more closely and reacting to a lot more. I've been doing it since before they knew when the election date would be. So I personally am a fan of Pierre Poilievre. I do not tell my Canadian friends how to vote because they are in the country. But as I always say, Mark Carney is a little bit sus, guys. He's sus. He's giving Joe Biden, he's giving Hillary Clinton. So you guys need to just watch out for that. But with that being said, let's jump over to EWTN and let's see what the bishop is actually saying. I don't know if this is the chief bishop. When I see it pop up, I'll read it for you guys. But let's see what the bishop has to say about this whole, I think they mentioned maids here, medical assisted in death, and the euthanasia and the what is it, Canada's election. So, and the fact that Mark Carney is a big advocate for abortion. So let's take a look at what they have to say about that.
Across the country, voters are concerned about many of the same issues: the economy, housing, jobs, and the high cost of living. And those concerns remain true here in Montreal, a predominantly French-speaking city.
This woman told us it's very difficult to secure housing in Montreal and other large cities. And without two sources of income, it can be hard to get an apartment. Across Canada, you can see how some people have fallen on hard times. We visited a parking lot with trailers and storage units across the river from Parliament Hill.
That's great. So They said without 2 sources of income, it's hard to get an apartment. Not even buy a house. That's what it said.
2 sources of income, it can be. This woman told us it's very difficult to secure housing in Montreal and other large cities. And without 2 sources of income, it can be hard to get an apartment.
Wow.
Across Canada, you can see how some people have fallen on hard times. We visited a parking lot with trailers and storage units across the river from Parliament Hill,
like New York.
where homeless men and women live. The suffering people might experience isn't unique to Canada, but a deceiving law passed in 2016 and expanded since then has been offering death as a solution.
We've seen all these different cases of people who have disabilities, who are living in poverty, people who people with having difficulty getting medical treatment, having housing problems, dying by euthanasia.
Alex Schadenberg is.
Okay, so this is I was hearing about this in Canada, but I hadn't reacted to it. But if this is happening in like that, first of all, if it's happening at all, I think it's a bit diabolical. I'm not gonna lie. This is a little bit, it's a little bit heinous. So a solution for people who are living in poverty, homelessness, sick, and having trouble getting access to medical care, euthanasia is an answer. Okay. I think that's a bit wicked.
As executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, he opposes the Canadian law referred to as MAID, or medical assistance in dying.
So that's what it says. Euthanasia equals MAID, medical assistance in dying.
Wanted something positive, so they came up with MAID, medical assistance in dying, and of course it's a lie. It's not about assistance in dying, it's about killing people. It is the Liberals who have promoted euthanasia over and over again. The Conservatives have said that they want to hold the line. Would they reverse things and make things better? I don't know. But sometimes holding the line looks better than, further going down the road of more killing.
Yeah.
Bishop McGrattan has spoken out against the euthanasia law, and we asked him to respond to Prime Minister Mark Carney, a practicing Catholic who speaks out in support of abortion.
Mark Carney is a practicing Catholic who speaks out and supports abortion. Okay. I am not one of those Christians who thinks that a Catholic is not a Christian, because some people think that because of certain beliefs and certain things. I think that that's overzealous. So I don't think that. I think Catholics are Christian. So I could still say, so Mark Carney is basically a Christian, a person who's given his life to Jesus, and he supports and speaks out on abortion. Okay. So keep that in mind, Canada, when you're voting for this person.
Support of abortion.
I would say that someone who is in politics and claims to be living according to their faith and making...
So this is Bishop William McGrattan. He's the president of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. Okay, so he's the president.
Claims to be living according to their faith and making such statements, we see the disconnect. And this is unfortunate with many of our politicians.
Denying Mark Carney communion if he continues his support of abortion, would that be an option that's on the table?
I think that those pastoral decisions would have to be made by the local bishop. Those are decisions, obviously, that affect the life of the local church. And therefore, if it is in a very challenging, scandalous position, I think then that is the responsibility of the bishop in a pastoral way to confront and to challenge various politicians in that way.
Even if it's a losing political issue, Maeve Gainey, the Youth and Outreach Coordinator for Campaign Life Coalition, encourages Canadians to remain faithful to the cause of protecting innocent life.
I think so. This says stand firm, and it has the Bible verse Ephesians 6:14 here. So I think it's interesting because they're considering that if Mark Carney continues to stand up and support abortion as a politician out in the open, that the possibility of him being denied communion is there. And we know that happened. I believe that happened to Joe Biden, didn't it? Was it Joe Biden, or who was it that was denied communion? By the Catholic Church in California. Was it Kamala Harris? Nancy Pelosi. Okay, so was it only her? Because I know this is not the first time it's happened, but we'll stick with that for now because this one says December 12th, 2024. I think it was somebody before her, but we see Nancy Pelosi's communion ban to be resolved by Vatican. So we see the Catholic Church does do that. Like if there is a politician who claims to be a professing Catholic and a practicing Catholic, this is also a Christian, and open out in the open in the public square because they are a politician and they know it's widely accepted, they are saying things like they support abortion. The Catholic Church will decide to and will revoke their privileges of them taking communion. So yeah, there you have that. So Stand Firm has the Bible verse Ephesians 6:14 here. So I'm gonna read that for you guys so we can see. It's probably a pro-life clinic. Okay, instruct believers to stand firm because the name of the pro-life organization is Stand Firm. So it says stand firm with your loins girded with truth and having on a breastplate of righteousness. So that's what they picked to be like the slogan underneath their brand name, which I like that they went with that.
Ultimately, it comes down to faithfulness. Because God doesn't ask us to be successful, He asks us to be faithful.
And Deacon Andrew says if all members of the church embrace their Catholic identity, they can have a greater impact on Canadian society.
We have to live our lives as Catholics fully. We're concerned that maybe we're not relevant anymore. It's not a question of relevance. The gospel is always not just relevant, the gospel is alive in the world, and people are always going to be drawn to it, but we have to be the ones that are going to bring it to them.
Amen. It's always going to be relevant. You're absolutely right, sir. Yeah, so I think that I was very excited to see this. I said, okay, so finally there's going to be somebody that's willing. The president of the Catholic Church out there, the bishops, he's the one that spoke up, and he said, yeah, you can tell that he was being very careful with his words and how he articulated himself and what he said. But I still appreciated his transparency and how he went out there to say, yeah, it is a possibility that it could be looked at, that this will not be something that he will be allowed to do if he keeps supporting these policies out in public. So again, we're going to switch gears and go to Jordan B. Peterson now. Now, this is something I've been doing in my last 3 live streams. So if you guys go back 3 live streams, you will see me react to Jordan Peterson, reaction to imminent Liberal victory in Canada. I started reacting to this because this is over 1 hour and 26 minutes long, and I wanted my Canadian friends and family to see this because I believe that Jordan Peterson took his massive platform and he's giving you guys a message so you do not go to the polls ignorant. He's letting you know things about Mark Carney because he even says that Mark Carney is a stranger to Canada. So I'm praying that my Canadian friends are paying attention to this. If you, like I said, if you guys go back 3 live streams, you'll see me react to part 1 of this. I did part 2 yesterday. No, Saturday. So part 1 was probably Friday, and then part 2 was Saturday. Today is the 3rd time we're reacting. We are at minute marker 27 minutes and 50 seconds. If you want to watch this whole thing in its entirety, just go to Jordan Peterson's channel, and it's called The Reaction to Imminent Liberal Victory in Canada, which I said I hope to God is not true. But let's pick up where we left off. Jordan Peterson again. He is educating us on Mark Carney's emergency, and I think where he comes from and why he pays attention to the things that he pays attention to. He also goes out on a limb to say that in Mark Carney's book Values, which I also heard Jordan B. Peterson and James Bolsilli talk about this when Jordan interviewed him, that in that book, Mark Carney is very transparent about a lot of his values, his beliefs, his belief system, what he stands for, and that Canadians really need to pay attention to that book because if they want to know what kind of prime minister Mark Carney will be, the book Values says it. So that was something that Jordan Peterson and James Basili went on to talk about. As I said, this is part 3 of me reacting to it. We are at minute marker 27 minutes and 50 seconds. So we're going to listen for about 10 minutes and then I'm going to stop it, and we will do it again tomorrow.
Whatsoever that there's an emergency, and I think a very strong case can be made, for example, that we were at historic lows in terms of carbon dioxide proportion in the atmosphere across a 500 million year period, right? So now and 50 years ago, our atmosphere had the lowest concentration of carbon dioxide that's been recorded in 500 million years, so that's a long time frame. We're getting close to the point where plants were actually going to have to struggle to breathe because the carbon dioxide levels were so low. And so now they've increased somewhat and plants are having an easier time and our crops are about 13% more efficient in consequence, and the planet is actually getting greener.
Are you ready for a fresh start after the holiday indulgence? Make 2025 your healthiest year yet with balance with nature. Those Christmas...
Getting greener.
Are you ready for a fresh start after...
So I don't think there's any reason at all for us to assume that we have an ecological emergency on our hand. I think, in fact, you can make somewhat of the opposite case, but be that as it may, let's say there's room for reasonable difference with regard to that interpretation. If you're more interested in that, I would highly recommend the work of Bjorn Lomborg, who's a Danish economist who's organized teams of economic analysts, very good ones, Nobel Prize winning economists, to assess the costs and benefits of carbon dioxide increase over about a 100-year period. And I don't know anyone more informed than Lomborg to have such a discussion, and he certainly has concluded, A, that there's no emergency, B, that there will be some costs to CO2 increase over the next 100 years, and that'll mean that we'll be somewhat less richer in 100 years than we would have been, given our trends for economic improvement, and that, most importantly, that spending untold trillions of dollars, like Carney wants to do, $2 trillion for Canada, for example, by 2050, to ameliorate the minor effects of climate change is catastrophic economically.
So James Basile also agreed with Jordan Peterson on this, that it would be catastrophically economically. James Basile is the co-founder of BlackBerry, if you guys aren't familiar with who he is. So the reason why Jordan Peterson is bringing up there is no emergency when it comes to carbon dioxide is because the carbon tax that Carney wants to impose. So I've had a couple of my Canadian friends jump in the chat and they're like, oh no, Q, like he's not imposing the carbon tax, he actually removed it. Well, Pierre Poilievre went on record to say that he's pulling one of the oldest tricks in the book, right? He's gonna remove the carbon tax because right now as sitting prime minister, he's like, okay, I can take this away. But he says that if he does win the election, that he will impose the tax and it will probably be higher than what it initially was. And because this is my third time reacting to this, meaning I'm doing it in parts because it's so long. At this part, if you guys go back to the second time I did it, which would be Saturday, it's in the live stream. Jordan Peterson talks about the fact that Mark Carney is acting like that he doesn't want to impose the carbon tax, but he very much does because he hasn't dissociated himself from it. Like he might not be talking about it as much, but there are things that he's doing and there's things that he's invested in. Jordan Peterson said that shows that he is still very much interested in imposing the carbon tax and that he in fact will. So Pierre Poilievre went on record to say that if Mark Carney becomes the official prime minister of Canada and he imposes this tax, that this will pretty much send Canada into economic turmoil. So Pierre went on record to say that. So let's see what happens. That's why Jordan Peterson is talking about, the carbon and the carbon tax in the way that he is, because he's saying there's no real emergency for Mark Carney to want to impose this tax. It's just a way to basically hurt working class Canadians. So it's something that you guys should basically be keeping your eyes on.
I don't really believe there is a carbon dioxide emergency, but even if there is a concern, spending vast amounts of money carelessly in a rush and panic is not going to do the planet any good, and is going to be particularly hard on poor people who are particularly affected by energy cost changes. So what that means is if you increase energy costs,
for example, by making fossil fuel more expensive before there's anything approximating a reasonable explanation. Mostly what you do is devastate the poor. And you devastate the poor in the Western world, and you absolutely devastate the poor in places like Africa. Now, the globalist utopians like Carney are perfectly willing to say, well, we're going to have to pay a price in the moment because the situation is so dire, and even if the poor have to suffer right now, it's much less than the poor in 100 years would suffer if we didn't take action. And my response to that is, you're willing to sacrifice the actual poor now for your hypothetical poor in 100 years. You're modeling those hypothetical poor with your economic and climate models, which are radically unstable. And you also believe, and this is absolutely delusional, that you have the economic and scientific wherewithal to do anything like a reasonable estimation of what the Earth's economy is going to be like in 100 years. Yeah, well, good luck on that front. And so it's definitely the case that poor people are going to pay a terrible price for the carbon dioxide emergency fear-mongering in the moment. And it's completely debatable whether these steps that have been taken to ameliorate the problem, which don't work, by the way, are going to have any beneficial effect whatsoever on anyone at all 100 years out. We just can't model 100 years out. That's just, no one who's credible thinks we can develop economic models that predict over a 100-year period. So, all right, so let's pull back from that now a little bit. So look, why don't we also take a look at, let's give the devil his due in a more comprehensive way, and let's assume that Carney's right about the carbon dioxide emergency, and he's not, and that radical steps have to be taken to ameliorate the problem, and that those radical steps will have the desired effect, right? Because Carney's promise is that if we dump $2 trillion into renewables and net zero, that's going to have a measurable impact on the climate and carbon dioxide amelioration, and that's going to be beneficial for people. But we don't have to guess at this anymore, because there's been a number of countries, including Canada, that have taken steps to ameliorate fossil fuel utilization and to move towards net zero.
Oh,
and so let's start with Canada.
So it hasn't been good. Jordan Peterson's gonna break this down a little bit, but I know the former Prime Minister of Britain, she was on the Toronto Sun, and they were interviewing her, and they were asking her some questions. Now, they didn't like the way Mark Carney ran the Bank of England, and she said that the way that, because of his net zero policy and what he wanted to do, it pretty much devastated the economy of Britain. She said, so if you guys do not want to see Canada be devastated, then you will not vote for Mark Carney. She said you will vote for Pierre Poilievre. She's hoping for a Pierre Poilievre win, and this is the former Prime Minister of Canada going on, of Great Britain going on record to say that. But she was very frank. She was also very transparent and direct, and she said the things that Mark Carney did, he pretty much devastated our economy. So I'm hoping that Canada puts Pierre Poilievre in place. So that's another thing for you guys just to be aware of.
Canada. So one of the things you guys might have noticed is that in the last month, Trump signed a $1 trillion international deal for the sale of natural gas. Now, the Prime Minister of Germany, the head of Germany, sorry, not the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister of Japan came to Canada a year ago, 2 years ago, cap in hand, asking the Liberal Party if Canada could make long-term arrangements with their countries to provide them with natural gas. And Trudeau said he couldn't make a business case for that. And Trump just signed a $1 trillion deal. And I guess that was the business case. And that's $150,000 for every Canadian family that went down the drain just with that one deal. Wow. And there's estimates that the Trudeau Liberals, the Liberal Party, has put the kibosh on $650 million worth of natural resource projects over the last 10 years. And so that's how we've been solving the carbon dioxide crisis from the Canadian perspective. And what's been the consequence of that from the environmental side? Well, first of all, Canada produces such a tiny proportion of carbon dioxide output on the international stage that we don't even count. Plus, our country is so forested that we're radically negative in the carbon dioxide production direction anyways. And even if we have rectified our carbon dioxide output by calamitously destroying our fossil fuel economy, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever, because all that's happened is that China, that has, like 25 times as many people as Canada, and India, which has even more people, economies and populations that are so large that they make Canada fundamentally irrelevant on the industrial and the population side. All they've been doing is picking up the slack. And so China's carbon dioxide output has increased radically over the last 20 years, as has India's, swamping any possible effects of climate amelioration by tiny populations like Canada. And the Chinese and the Indians think, well, why can't we benefit from industrialization just like the West has? A question Africa's asking as well, and they're absolutely right. And so all it's meant, you can see this with Australia, for example, because Australia has foregone.
And they're right to be asking the question, why can't we benefit from it, right? Canadians could have benefited from it, but because Justin Trudeau said he couldn't make a case for that, he chose not to. And like Jordan Peterson said, that was $150,000 that left from every Canadian family that you guys now do not get to get. So that matters when Justin Trudeau appointed Mark Carney as his economic advisor. These are the kind of things that I think Jordan Peterson is putting out there for you guys to pay attention to when it comes to this election.
All coal-fired electrical production in their country, but they ship coal to China, and China builds coal plants like mad, as does India. And since we all breathe the same air, all that's actually happened is the industrial power that could have been Australia's and Canada's has been shifted to China, which is a terrible authoritarian communist state, and to India, which at least has the advantage of being somewhat like a Western democracy. So the Canadian contribution to environmental improvement has been negligible, absolutely negligible, no practical effect whatsoever, but the economic consequences have been absolutely dire. So Canada now, the richest Canadian province, has a lower gross domestic product per person. So that's an indication of our total economic productivity. We're lower than Mississippi. Canadians produce 60 cents of.
And in case anybody from Canada is watching now or watches this later and they're like, okay, we're lower than Mississippi, what does that mean? It means that you guys are getting really poor, because Mississippi is probably one of our poorest states in the United States.
Being negligible, absolutely negligible, no practical effect whatsoever, but the economic consequences have been absolutely dire. So Canada now, the richest Canadian province, has a lower gross domestic product per person. So that's an indication of our total economic productivity. We're lower than Mississippi. Canadians produce 60 cents of value for every dollar the Americans produce, despite the fact that 10 years ago, and that's before the Liberals were in power for a decade, Canada and the US were equal. We were at parity. And the forecast for Canada's economic development, and this assumes something like the continuation of the policies that were put in place by the Trudeau Liberals, is that we will have the worst economic performance of the 40 most developed countries in the world for the next 4 decades. So if you want more of that, much more expensive fossil fuel, much more expensive air conditioning and heat for your house in frigid Canada, and you want your children to live in a society that's radically poor so the globalist utopians can fail to do anything for the planet, then Carney's your man. And these corporations.
Wow.
And these corporations that work per person, so that's a. And the forecast for Canada's economic development, and this assumes something like the continuation of the policies that were put in place by the Trudeau Liberals, is that we will have the worst economic performance of the 40 most developed countries in the world for the next 4 decades. So if you want more of that, much more expensive fossil fuel, much more expensive air conditioning and heat for your house in frigid Canada, and you want your children to live in a society that's radically poor so the globalist utopians can fail to do anything for the planet, then Carney's your man.
Yeah, that's not who you guys want to be voting for. So I'm actually going to start it from there tomorrow because I just think that that's a good starting point to catch everybody up. As I said, I've been reacting to this in part. So this is part 3 that I reacted to this particular one. It's 1 hour and 26 minutes. Again, if you guys want to watch it, just go to Jordan Peterson's channel. It's titled Reaction to Imminent Liberal Victory in Canada, which I hope is not the case for you guys. So with that being said, we're on our last clip of the live stream, guys. Every night over here, I end my live stream with a clip from Cliff Buell. He's a YouTube content creator who focuses on Christian content. As a Christian, I like to end my live streams with Christian content. It's something I have been led to do, so I am thankful for Cliff's content because without it, I wouldn't be able to end a live stream like this with you guys. Usually, if I'm not ending with Cliff, I'm ending with another YouTube content creator that has that usually focuses on Christian content or is a Christian. So today's title is Should Kids Be Transforming? Right? And it says she regrets her decision to transform. So let's take a listen.
More need to hear this. When I was 16, my parents took me to Planned Parenthood. They tried to come into the doctor's office, but when they followed behind me, the nurse stopped them and asked if I wanted them in the room. I said no. The doctor explained all the side effects of testosterone that I already knew. I smiled and said I was ready for my first shot. My parents were brought back in, and they were essentially told that I had made the choice. Their only role was to sign the paperwork. I took testosterone for 3 years. When I was 16, my voice dropped to a baritone range. When I was 17, I started losing hair. When I was 18, I started my application for the University of Montana. I had to apply for a dorm room. I knew I wasn't male and didn't want to live with a man. I couldn't possibly fit into a female dorm room with a beard, chest hair, and a baritone voice. I felt like I didn't fit in as a man or as a woman. So when I was 19 in my first week of college, I detransitioned. Of course, I ignored the risks. I was 16 and invincible. Even if I had known testosterone would give me prediabetes, high blood pressure, early onset osteoporosis, and even an increased risk of sterility, I wouldn't have said no. In my mind, there was no other option. Kids are not able to fully understand the life-changing consequences of hormones. I was unable to see into the future, but I shouldn't have been expected to in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because she says that she went with her parents to Planned Parenthood and she was going in there to talk to the doctor. I guess she was about to take testosterone and her parents were going to go in the room with them and the doctor stops them and says, "Do you want them in here?" She says no, so they don't go in. The doctor explains all the side effects of her taking testosterone and she smiles and says, "I'm ready for my first shot," and she gets her first shot. And she says she takes it for 3 years. So she says that, when I was 16, I thought I was invincible. Like, I didn't think I would be predisposed to all these different things, and I shouldn't have been held accountable to think like that in the first place. And she's absolutely right. This is the reason why President Trump can pass legislation like biological men, yes, who are trans women, but biological men who are born men are not allowed to play in sports with people who are born women, right? This is why it's like that, because you have this person here who's now much older than 15, 16, right? Who has transitioned back to their original gender. And they're like, you know what? When I was that age, I couldn't even comprehend anything that I even really wanted. Like, I thought I was invincible. I didn't think anything would hurt me or bother me. And that's why it's so pivotal for parents to have a say-so in things like this. Listen, you might not like the Trump administration and or cabinet, but the fact of the matter is that the things that they are passing and they are putting in place, they are things that has already been set in place by someone much greater, right? Like, God understands why he does things the way he does them. And I'm not going to get on a tangent and be like, oh, God doesn't make mistakes, so you can't change this, and this. I'm already fully aware of those things. But there are people who have real feelings and who are going through real things, and they think that if they do some of these things that they will be fulfilled, right? I'm not going to say it's instant gratification because I have friends and the LGBTQI plus community, so I know that it's a transition is far from instant. So that's not even a great word. But what I will say is that it can be painful, it can be tough, it can be lonely, and that's why people need to be met where they are at, right? They don't need to be met with Bible verses thrown at them and you're going to hell and God don't make no mistakes. It's like, you know what? Even people that don't believe in God, they are aware of things like this. And this is something that I've learned just talking to people. I can't tell you how many people I've sat down with and they're like, Q, I already know all of these things. Like, I've already heard all of these things. So it's like leading with that, you'll hit a wall really quick. Just meet somebody where they're at. Ask somebody what their name is. If you're like, I don't want to call anybody by their opposite pronouns, that's cool. What's your name? That, like, we don't call each other by pronouns anyway. Like, I don't walk around work talking about hey him, or like hey her. Like I don't say things like that. I call a person by their name. So you don't have to do that stuff. You know, you can just, and someone can be like, oh, well, if I say this in a conversation, okay, well, guess what? Maybe you just don't talk about that person. Why should you? Why do you need to, right? You can, it's perfectly fine to be cordial, call somebody by their name and just keep it moving. And that doesn't mean that you have to support anything. But these are still true feelings that people go through, and they don't always need the Bible thrown at them. Sometimes they just need compassion thrown at them, or understanding, or just an ear. And if you're not that person, then point them to somebody. You know, we are fully aware, those of us who have given our life to Christ, we know that God does not make mistakes. But there's a time and place for that, I believe. And this comes solely from me interacting with real life human beings with a soul. There's a time and place for that. And sometimes when someone is in a real deep place of hurting, a statement like God doesn't make mistakes is just not helpful. It's not. So just keep that in mind, guys. Try to meet people where they're at. So with that being said, guys, I appreciate you guys stopping by and hanging out on the corner with me. It is always fun. I will be back tomorrow, same time, about, what did I get, 4:55, 5 o'clock? Yeah, somewhere around there. So I think I had it set for 4:55. I changed it. And then we jumped on about 17:05. So same time tomorrow, guys. Take care of yourselves, and we will be back for the daily live stream. What I always say, love yourselves, love one another. Take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and be peaceful. Peace.